Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting for October 16th, 2019. I'd like to let you know that live streaming is recording. It will be uploaded tomorrow morning. For the live streaming is not on at the moment currently, but it is being recorded. And I'd also like to acknowledge that we are on the territory of the Coast Salish people. And moving now with the approval of the agenda, there was some. Director Smith.
Thank you. Through the chair, I would like to add new business. I've passed out an item for the directors in regards to adding new business for the Community Works Funds Community 3.0 Asset Management Infrastructure Investment total of $3 million. My recommendation, I would like to delete number 2 of that recommendation that has been handed out, and just number 1 will be the recommendation.
Okay, so there has been some new business added. New business 1.
Is this
Director
actually
Acton?
new business? Because this committee decided it would go to the board?
Yes, it is new business because it's separate than what we had discussed at the board.
I thought it was
Director
the same
Acton?
thing. I just got the email. I'm not feeling prepared for this, but I'll leave it up to the committee.
Okay. Director Morrison.
I too just received the email this morning. I've just been talking with staff. I've got far more questions than answers to be able to comfortably discuss this, and I feel this is absolutely more appropriately dealt with at the board as we have a resolution going forward, and this could be added to that discussion that we will be having at the board.
Yep. So I'm going to be moving on now, and I'm looking for an approval of the agenda with the new business, one new business item. It's been moved. Is there a seconder? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion is carried. Moving on now to the adoption of the Electoral Area Services Committee of October 2nd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendation before you is that the minutes of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of October 2nd, 2019 be adopted.
Looking for a mover? Second? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Moving now, is there any business arising from the minutes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There is none.
Okay. Moving now to the public input period. Is there anybody in the gallery that wishes to speak to something on the agenda today? Welcome.
Good day. Sheila Bell Irving from Shawnigan Lake. I'd like to talk about the R4, the rezoning in Cowichan Bay, the PIM rezoning, and
Excuse me, I don't think you can speak to.
Oh, I'm not allowed to speak about that one?
You cannot speak to that. There has been a public hearing and we cannot take any information.
Wow. Thanks.
Is there anyone else in the gallery that wishes to speak? Seeing none, we'll move on to delegations. We have no delegations. We have correspondence.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item C1 is a grant and aid request for Electoral Area B, Shawnigan Lake. And the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area B, Shawnigan Lake, in the amount of $5,000 be provided to Cowichan Station Area Association for the final stage of community engagement and outreach of the Coxsila Watershed Ecosystem Base Study.
Been moved, seconded. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Next is information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under item information, IN1, there is Electoral Area E Advisory Planning Commission minutes from June 11th, 2019. and Electoral Area A, Mill Bay Malahat Advisory Planning Commission minutes from October 3rd, 29, and those are there for information.
It's for information. Any questions on those? Seeing none, move along to reports. R1.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R1 is a report from Development Services Division regarding application numbers DP 18B19 and DVP 18801 for PID 005997283, Development Permit Application and Development Variance Permit Application for Phase 3, Shawnigan Station. And this item was referred from the October 2nd Electoral Area Services Committee meeting. And there is one recommendation with 2 points before you. Would you,
No, we'll wait for the,
okay.
thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, these applications were presented at the last EISC and referred back to staff. So in terms of the development variance permit application, the applicant is now only seeking one variance, and it relates to the common storage requirement of the zoning. The applicant has withdrawn the other variance request relating to the minimum parcel size and dwelling width, and instead will be submitting an application to amend the zoning, as it was determined, as noted in the report and in the last meeting, that it's a density issue that can't be varied under the Local Government Act. So that application would come before the committee in the near future once it's submitted. Okay, so I just wanted to go over again what the bylaw says in the zone. So in terms of the variance, the bylaw states that within each RR5 development, a minimum of 25 square meters per parcel of land within the zone be set aside as a common storage area for the needs of the zone's residents. And the applicant is requesting to vary this to effectively from 25 square meters per parcel to 0, effectively eliminating the requirement. And as part of this application is offering a common area for parking and green space. In other words, it's a voluntary amenity contribution related to the variance request. So this plan is the proposed subdivision layout, and in your package, maybe you can zoom in on it a little easier as well, but the 2 lots shown as common property are adjacent to lot 195, and they're labeled, one as a parking lot and the other one just says common property. It's the triangular lot. There's a landscape plan in your package as well that shows that the triangular lot is a green space with some benches. Together, those 2 lots make up 914.2 square meters. And the recommendation in the staff report is that this common space be bumped up to 1,100 square meters. And this would most likely be accomplished by shifting the parking lot over slightly and increasing the amount of green space on the triangular lot. And the purpose of this recommendation was generally to be consistent with the previously approved DVP and also to address some of the concerns that were heard at the APC originally in terms of additional green space. And while it may seem like a minor increase, it is a difference of 185 square meters, and it's likely that one less lot would be achieved along this western portion of the street. If the committee goes with the staff recommendation, the applicant would have to amend this plan as it is only showing the 914 square meters and adjust the lot lines. And this is effectively the same plan that came forward last time. So following the last meeting, the applicant and staff did discuss the committee's concerns. The applicant did look at providing access to existing common spaces in some of the other phases, paths and viewing platforms, and did get a response back from the strata property manager that there was some issues around increasing strata fees as a result and liability on their property, and there was a written rationale submitted by the applicant sort of explaining some of their considerations after the last meeting. So I wanted to note that the recommended resolution does include support for the variance and includes the condition of this increase to 1,100 square meters. It does not include the sliver of land that is on the opposite side of the railway corridor. The applicant is not in favor of the additional increase currently and would prefer to leave it as shown on the plan at 914.2, and they would like to address the committee on that matter. And for clarification, in terms of option 2, if the committee preferred, which is not on the slide but is in your report, the variance in that case would be denied and the applicant would be required to revise their subdivision layout plan and bring it back to the committee, subject to meeting the current zoning requirement for this common storage and all the development permit area guidelines as well. Thank you, Madam Chair. And the
Thanks,
applicant
Ms.
would like to
Herrera.
speak.
Does the applicant wish to add anything?
Please.
Could you come to the podium, please?
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to go through a bit of the history, Madam Chair and Directors, I'd just like to go through a bit of the history on this subject property. The very first subdivision included a cash payment to CVRD, cash in lieu of park dedication, and that's because there was no adjoining properties that CVRD thought they could take advantage of that type of application. Then the second ownership group, Arbutus Ridge, did the same thing. They paid another 5% to CVRD, and that cash payment was CVRD's choice again because, again, there was no adjoining park properties that made sense to put some land aside on this subject property to create a park. And I think that payment went to a building of the Canadian Western Trail or something like that, regardless. And as far as the current status of this land is, we actually exceed our 5 requirement for recreational area. It requires 10%, and we are currently at 21.6%. So with that in mind, I also approached the Strata manager last week, and I said, where do you stand on some additional common property, or where do you stand if we were to try and provide access, or usable access to the existing common property? Although it's not defined anywhere in the regional district terms what recreational property represents and how it has to be accessed, but their immediate reaction was that they weren't interested in that at all. This particular strata struggles with their annual budget now. They're a standalone community for sewer and water, so it's pretty expensive for strata fees. This additional 71 lots is going to bring some relief to the current residents, in that will help to lower strata fees. So when we developed the plan, we actually had developed it in consultation with the strata management and the president at the time, and so the plan was reflective, it's not up any longer, was reflective of what their desires were. So I'm speaking on behalf of not just ownership here, I'm speaking on behalf of the strata after conferring with the strata. Their wishes are that they don't need to see any more recreational property, and they didn't want us to invest any money to provide access because that would be an additional cost for maintenance and could carry some liabilities as well. So I think the subject property currently meets all of the land use requirements for that, and that's why I'm suggesting we'd like to leave the plan the way it is. Otherwise it does, as mentioned by Sheila, have some domino effects to the already plan that's in place, and some of the pre-sales as well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Turning to the director of the area. Thank you, you can be seated,
So I
unless
just
you have
have,
a question. Is it for staff? Do you have any questions for staff?
I don't know, I just have some comments. When you talk about history, there's so much more history than was mentioned, and including a $30,000 playground was promised at one point, and that was never received. And then there was some retaining walls that were left for us to repair with gas tax money, and as well as some of the sewer system has been repaired with gas tax. So, and then the zoning right now, how it is, it actually requires you to give 25 meters square for common storage area. So that's more than 1,600 square meters. And, you know, so we're kind of meeting somewhere in the middle, and good negotiators actually don't even meet in the middle. But I think in this case, the CVRD is willing to meet you there. And I guess that's about it for my comments.
Is there any more discussion? Director Salmon?
Thank you. Question for the applicant. Just, I was reading the geotech, so how are the repairs that I understand you're going to be doing, repairs to the ENN, the undermining of that? Well, just the timing of that and what's your expectation as far as possible implications for the stability of your site with seismic or rain events?
So we had originally engaged Brimble Engineering, and they are not slope remediation specialists. So we've engaged Ryzik, and they are slope remediation specialists. And then Island Railway Corridor has their own geotechnical engineer of record engaged as well. And over the past several months, we have finalized on the remediation plan, and it starts on Monday. And it looks like it will probably take about 2 weeks' worth of work to remediate and bring the slope to current stabilization requirements, including 500-year flood and seismic activity, and make safe any of the properties on that east boundary.
Follow-up, Director Salmon?
Yeah, so this may be more for staff, but should there be a need to adjust the subdivision layout, especially for those houses along that below the slope that's might be affected, can that be adjusted? Can we, in future, is there a scope, or how would that work? Maybe staff can comment on that.
Ms. Herrera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, yes, this DP could always be amended. This development permit is not a final subdivision approval from the CVRD. It's only meant to address the guidelines, and then, of course, the variance that's also being requested. And the final sort of compliance with the CVRD doesn't happen sort of till much later in this subdivision process. And there's still a side, like the original process starts with the Ministry of Transportation, and they're still going to have to review this even once the development permit's issued. So there's still a full subdivision process underway. And this development permit could be amended if there was issues through their later requirements through the subdivision.
Thank you. Okay, looking to what is the committee's pleasure? We have a resolution, we have a recommendation here. Director Acton.
I guess I still have two more comments. To your comment on expenses for a trail or a park, we're just looking at our parks budget now, and some parks cost as little as $500 a year to maintain, so I'm not sure that that's a lot of money amongst
Director Acton, we
120
really can't
houses, but-
negotiate.
okay.
We're not here
But
to negotiate
I'm not negotiating that.
amenities. Well, there is a recommendation, we have to stick to
I'm
the
just saying
staff's
that's not really a
recommendation.
valid argument. And now I forget what my other comment was. Oh, in the application, in the staff report, it does say that there's going to be an application for a rezoning amendment. So it's challenging when we look at these applications in bits and pieces. And that's my
This is the
comment
process,
on
and it's
that.
not, what I understand from staff, it's not over yet, so this is just part of the process, so there is opportunities.
So I'd like to move the recommendation by
Okay,
staff.
it's been moved. Is there a seconder? The one that's the one that's on our, yes, yes, she said.
Option one?
Yes. Well, is it option one? I'm looking at the recommend. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the staff report, there are two options. Option one was the recommendation that staff put forward. Option two is a different one, which is to deny. So I was just seeking clarification on which option.
Director Acton.
I see two in the recommendation, there's two,
Yes, there's
Two.
recommendation one that
Yeah,
has 2
1 and 2.
points.
yeah, recommendation.
But at the bottom, there is
The recommended
another
resolution
option two. So you're
To
recommending,
approve staff's recommendation.
okay. So that's the one that is on our white sheet currently. Should we read it out? Please do.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the recommendation before you, option one from the staff report, is that development variance permit number DVP 18B01 for PID 005997283 to vary zoning bylaw number 985, section 7.3EHB by reducing the common storage requirement from 25 meters squared per parcel to 0 meters squared per parcel, be approved, subject to minor revisions to the subdivision plan to accommodate a minimum common space area of 1,100 meters squared, and point 2, that development permit number DP 18B19 for PID 005997283 for an intensive residential subdivision be approved.
It's been moved by Director Acton and it's been seconded by Director Nicholson. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion is carried. That goes to October 23rd board, whatever next board is. They're gone. Moving on now to R2.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R2 is a report from the Inspection and Enforcement Division regarding September 2019 Building Inspection Report, and that report is for information.
Is there any questions or comments for Mr. McDonald? Seeing none. Moving on to R3.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R3 is a report from the Community Planning Division regarding the Town of Lake Cowichan boundary extension referral request, and that is for direction.
Mr. Tippett, welcome. Did you want?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looks like it's not showing what I see on my screen. This is essentially a referral from the town about a proposed boundary expansion on the western edge of town. I don't have a map, but the map is attached to your report. It's a single parcel where the owners who have a retail rental shop or something of that sort on the property wish to become part of the town of Lake Cowichan. And the regional district is obviously a referral agency for this, and the brief report before you is just seeking whether there's any information that the committee would like to share with the town of Lake Cowichan and ultimately the province of BC that's going to make the decision about changing boundaries.
Thank you. Director Morrison.
Don't exactly have the wording, but I would like to move option 1, and instead of where it says insert comments, I would ask that staff work with perhaps the directors of Area F and I to craft the response to this referral request.
Option 1 has been moved and seconded. Can you read us option 1, please? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Option one is that staff advise the town of Lake Cowichan of the following concerns respecting the proposed boundary extension referral request of 8079 Nicer Road of the town of Lake Cowichan, and that staff work with the directors from Electoral Area F and I to craft the response.
Okay. All in favor? Oh, there's discussion. Director Nicholson?
I thought this was really an interesting thing, and I guess where I had a real problem was there didn't appear to be any clear purpose for this or reason for that, which is required as part of this. Does anyone have any information on that?
Director Morrison, do you have any more information?
There's multiple reasons why a response as opposed to no concerns response would be appropriate, and I would rather craft the response and distribute it to directors in advance as opposed to carrying it on in a recorded meeting, and there's numerous concerns, and I think that it'd be more than appropriate that we craft the response, distribute it to directors, and then send it off.
Thank you, Director Morrison. Is there any other questions? Director Nicholson?
Does that mean it'll come back to committee?
Director Morrison? It does come back to committee.
I turn to staff.
Madam Chair, I think that if you would like the response, if directors would like the response to be issued by the board, it probably should come back to the committee for consideration.
Thank you. So we'll come back to the committee. Seeing no other questions, I'm going to call it. All in favor? Opposed, if any?
I oppose that.
Unopposed. Okay, turning now to R4.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R4 is a report from the General Manager, Land Use Services Department regarding development services. And there is 3 recommendations attached to that staff report.
Oh. There's actually 4, we're missing 1. So it's going to be on the screen when you're finished.
Okay.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I was expecting to see the CR2 zone and Couch and Bay report being R4. There's another R4?
No, there's a,
Yeah.
okay. All righty. we're
Point of
moving-
clarification,
Go
Madam
ahead.
Chair.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so the next item is item R4, which is a report from the Community Planning Division regarding CR2 zone in Cowichan Bay with a recommendation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, in January this year, staff came forward because we had a couple of inquiries from the owners of CR2 zone property in Cowichan Bay Village about whether it would be possible for them to have R3 zoning instead of CR2. And because upon review, there were 4 parcels that actually have CR2 zoning in Cowichan Bay Village, we decided to ask the committee whether we should write letters to the 4 owners and see whether there was any maybe consensus on them all wanting to have a serious change, or at least a majority or something like that, asking for it, in which case it would make sense to do it as a single initiative rather than a series of independent applications. And apologies to the committee, it's taken a long time for me to actually report back because we did get feedback no more than a few months after the letters went out in February. So in essence, 2 of the 4 got back and said they'd prefer to have R3 zoning. The other 2 didn't reply, which I assume means that they're happy with the CR2 zoning. What we had hoped when sending out the letters is that there would be a majority, or perhaps all of them would prefer to go one way or the other, in which case, as I say, it might have made sense to propose a CVRD-initiated amendment. Just for background purposes, and I think the report touches on this, the OCP designation for Cowichan Bay Village residential area permits either CR2 or R3 zoning, so it's not a community plan amendment issue at all. It's sort of a technical zoning matter. So considering that only 2 of the 4 wanted the change, and also considering our relative shortage of staff resources to deal with applications, what I'm recommending here is that we refer the requested change on the part of the 2 who would prefer to have R3 zoning to the upcoming zoning harmonization process, which probably will be kicking off in earnest next year, rather than proceeding with an individual amendment to the zoning right now as a separate initiative. And I guess the alternative to that is to not do that even, and simply invite anyone who chooses to have a different type of zoning as their preference to apply to amend it. But that's not my recommendation. My recommendation is to refer to zoning harmonization process.
So I just have a question, seeing as it's in Area D. So anybody that's applying, well, they couldn't apply until after this process is done. And so that would be in next year is when they could even consider.
Madam Chair, it would be possible for someone to apply now if they wished. I don't think that the harmonized zoning bylaw is imminent. So there, if somebody did apply now, it's possible that we could process a zoning change in Cowichan Bay on that property prior to the harmonized zoning being done. But yeah, at some point in time, we're going to be getting close to implementation of harmonized zoning, and then any in-stream application anywhere is going to become a logistical issue to manage. But our best estimate of when we're likely to be ready to proceed to bylaw stage with combined zoning is probably a year and a half from now. And that should give enough time to process an amendment if someone chose to apply because they're on a tighter timeline than what I just mentioned.
Okay, looking to the committee. It's been moved, or you have a question? Question?
This may be more of a point of order, but did we say there'd been a public hearing about this?
No.
Well,
This is just cluster residential
Sure,
from
but
our OCP.
in question period, did we not have a member of the public wanting to ask a
She
question?
mentioned PIM in her
it
conversation.
was
Okay,
different. Oh.
well, that is where I had to shut down the conversation. Director Acton.
Thank you. So essentially, they've been downzoned without knowing?
Madam Chair, I wouldn't say so. The CR2 zone actually has amenity provisions in it, which if they're acted on, potentially allow more density to occur on the site than would be possible under R3. But it's there are a serious number of conditions associated with that regarding amenity space and so forth. But to further flesh out the reply, the base zoning available in the absence of an amenity contribution in the CR2 zone is lower than the R3. And I think I know for sure one of the two parties who would prefer to have R3 zoning felt that their parcel wasn't really a good candidate site to provide that amenity, and that's why they wanted to go back to the other zone, because in their case, if they couldn't provide the amenity, it would be a downzoning, or in other words, they wouldn't be able to achieve the density they previously could have achieved under the old zoning. At least that's their contention.
Director Acton.
Thank you, follow-up. Well, would it be wise to send this to the APC for comment from them on this? Because they would know the area well and probably remember the history of this.
Madam Chair, my recommendation essentially does what Director Acton just recommended in the sense that it would be referred to them at the appropriate time as we're doing zoning on a region-wide basis. Issues like this, if you're familiar with the OCP harmonization process, we've had very intensive discussions with the APCs. So in short, yes. I would prefer not to send it to them now, because the whole gist of my report is we don't really have the resources to get into a detailed CVRD initiated application and amendment process on this one thing right now.
It's been moved and seconded. Any more discussion? I'm going to call a question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Moving on now to R5.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R5 is a report from the General Manager, Land Use Services Department regarding Development Services Update with a recommendation with 3 points.
Welcome, Ms. Cheroff, and you have a PowerPoint for us.
Thank you. I'm learning. There are a number of tables and graphs provided in the report, which indicate or provide an update on development application processing for the Development Services Division. The table that you see before you is the number of applications that have been received in the first 3 quarters of 2019 in comparison to 2018. And if you look at those numbers, you can see that we're very consistent in terms of numbers among the various types of applications that we're seeing. And similarly, if we look at total applications per quarter between 2018 and 2019, there is some variation. However, the trend is generally the same. And then again, looking at each electoral area, you can see that the number of applications received per electoral area between 2018 and 2019 is also very similar, with the most activity continuing to occur in Area B, Shawnigan Lake, and Area D, Cowichan Bay. So currently we have 172 open files. That's in comparison to 165 open files back in April of this year. That correlates to about 20 to 25 files for each of our planners and about 4 to 5 files for either planning assistants or technicians and more senior staff, supervisors and managers, with an average processing time, and I stress the word average, of 4 to 14 months. And in some cases, we've had development permits turned around in as little as 2 weeks. And we all know that we have also some applications that are probably taking in excess of 2 years. So there's a wide variation in file processing time. Staff in the Development Services divisions have been undertaking a number of different activities to improve service delivery, and these are identified in the slide. So moving from paper to digital referrals when dealing with advisory planning commissions and external agencies. They developed a number of templates, internal business templates and updated templates. So we have an internal development permit template for general manager delegated development permits, and so that was updated. They also updated their PowerPoint template for Electoral Area Services Committee. There's been a development review team that's been established. They are documenting procedures so that if we have new staff come in, they can easily reference those procedures and know how to do things, and also to ensure that we have consistency in our procedures. They prepared a handbook, which I'm sure you're all familiar with by this point, which they're using, actively sharing with applicants and people that are making inquiries about development. They're tracking applications, improving processes to track applications. We've implemented priority processing per board direction. Inquiries coverage has expanded. So there was a significant reduction in the spring of 2019, and that has recently been increased with some increased staff available to do that type of work. We're actively tracking inquiries to ensure that we are providing timely responses to all inquiries that are made, either at the front counter or by phone or by email. We're using web portals and with various public agencies, such as the Ministry of Transportation, dealing with subdivision applications. Trying to conduct more regular pre-application meetings, and also looking at PlaceSpeak as a platform for potential improvements in public consultation or engagement around more complex applications like rezoning. And those are just a couple of sort of examples. So you can see the development handbook that's available on the website, and then staff prepared a sort of a example site plan that we reference and provide to people who are wanting to understand what needs to be provided in their applications. So there are a number of opportunities to further enhance service delivery, which I think are sort of the focus going forward. And one of those things is looking at delegation of authority. And when you think about that, you probably think mainly about delegation of a development permit approval authority to the general manager. However, their delegations dealt with in a number of different ways in our legislation in the Local Government Act, and could apply to not only development permits, but temporary use permits can apply to the provision of landscape security, and you also use it when you refer or delegate authority around public hearings to electoral area directors. So it's handled in a number of different ways, and it doesn't always have to be the general manager of land use services who's the delegate. And in some cases, you may also want to consider the option to delegate authority to a committee. So for instance, a development permit that you might be now making a recommendation on to the board, you could in theory have that development permit stop at the committee. It wouldn't necessarily have to go to the board if the board authorized by bylaw for the committee to approve that development permit. So little things like that sort of we could look at, seemingly little things that could really save a lot of time in the long run. APC referrals are another area that I think warrants some further consideration. So we currently have a number of development permit applications that are being referred to APCs, and you know, looking at those groups being great representatives of their communities who act as good sounding boards and understand what the community's values and needs are, but at the same time potentially could be frustrated when, you know, their input isn't necessarily usable in respect of the application that's been referred to them. So that is another area that does need to be examined more closely. At the same time, you might have applications that aren't currently referred to APCs that you may wish to refer to APCs, and so your development procedures bylaw stipulates a certain procedure for various application types that you might want to look at revising so that you have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to your referrals. Technology is another area that my report discusses, and that looks at shifting away from just using Microsoft Word and Excel, which are, you know, excellent programs, but they're programs that we've been using for a very long time, and moving into dedicated software programs that can provide greater integration with other departments in the CVRD, potential for greater integration with web platforms so that you have more seamless and more efficient processing of applications. And then lastly, looking at the option of doing a service delivery review. So while I have identified a number of things that could potentially be done, that this is, you know, my opinion and my evaluation, I think that there's always an opportunity to ask a neutral third party to evaluate what has been happening in the department, and to say, you know, you're on track or you're not, or here are some other things that you could potentially do differently. And then recognizing, you know, the strengths that we have as well. So what are we doing well? And looking at how we're doing in comparison to other BC local governments. So, you know, all of our stats are somewhat meaningless unless we know how long things really should take, or how many files we should really be managing at any given time. So that's just a picture of a development permit process that's moving forward through an advisory planning commission, and then to the committee, and then to the board. And if you were to, you know, remove some of those steps, obviously the process gets shorter. But at the same time, you also need to evaluate, you know, what are the impacts of that? So what are the costs and benefits of changing your processes, given that you want a good outcome at the end? So staff are making 3 recommendations. One is that an external consultant be hired to undertake a service delivery review of the Development Services Division to evaluate and provide recommendations regarding staff resources, policies, and processes. 2, that staff prepare a report for Electoral Area Services Committee consideration on potential amendments to the CBRD Development Procedures and Fees bylaw regarding delegation of authority and advisory planning commission referrals. And 3, that the Development Services Division provide quarterly reports to the Electoral Area Services Committee to advise on the type, number, and status of applications received for each electoral area, commencing January 2020.
Thank you, Ms. Charoff. Is there any questions for staff? I have Director Wilson first, and then Director Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a couple of good things that have come out of the presentation. The pre-application meetings that you've been having with a lot of the applicants, I'm getting some good reports on those coming back again, because it does clear up a path, and that's a good way forward. And also the development handbook has been very useful. I've been handing those out to various people, and they're very good. I did talk to one of the staff about the technology that you were talking about, and very, very much in favour of using the technology for tracking and making sure that these things are progressed and not forgotten or lost in the paperwork. Do you have any idea of what that kind of software might cost? And then I've got a follow-up after that. Thank you.
Ms. Charoff?
Through the chair, it's a bit of a dangerous question, and I wish I had somebody from IT here.
Very roughly.
It's
I'm
not
looking.
inexpensive. I hesitate, and I have the general manager of corporate services looking at me. It could be $500,000.
Oh my goodness.
Yes,
Okay.
it could be significant. But further to that, the organization also needs to get its ducks in a row, so to speak, when it comes to our records. And so there is a supplemental request going forward to the 2020 budget for records management software. And so there's a process that we need to go through in terms of building what we have and then implementing systems that will build on corporate records so that we're doing things in a logical and sequential, rational manner.
Yeah.
So I would be very hesitant to throw a number out and say, let's just go
Yeah.
for it. We need to
Okay.
do some planning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then one more for just
Follow
follow up. At UBCM a couple of weeks ago, Selena Robinson gave an interesting speech, and one of the remarks that she made, and I wrote it down here, she said, "Put the most senior and experienced planner on the front desk, not the most junior." Mainly from the point of view of dealing with the questions that people ask, so that the poor guy who's been there for 2 weeks is not stuck saying, I'll get back to you on that. Is that something that you plan on doing, or putting somebody who's not inexperienced there, or how is it handled right now?
So through the chair, that's a great question. I mean, in the past, I've worked in situations where front counter duties have been shared amongst both junior and senior planning staff, and I think that's great. It's great for senior staff who might be working on the policy side to actually work in